Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Philadelphia and to the 2025 Conference of the International Society for MacIntyrean Enquiry. My name is Dan Sheely, and it's my privilege to welcome you here to the University of Pennsylvania on behalf of the host organization, the Collegium Institute for Catholic Thought and Culture, which I am the director. Here at Penn, the first non-sectarian or even secular university in America, Collegium was founded in 2013 with a Catholic vision. A vision that we understand in two different senses of the word Catholic. That is, first, to draw contemporary learning here into conversation with the Catholic intellectual tradition, and second, to cultivate reflection on the Catholic or universal questions that should animate every human life, whether of any faith or of none. In pursuing this twofold mission, we have always found Alasdair MacIntyre to be no small guide. So frequently inspired, and perhaps just as often provoked by his major works, as well as his seminal essays in God, philosophy, and universities, as well as, for me most recently, his lecture, The Very Idea of a University, Aristotle, Newman, and Us, we considered it the great honor that it truly was to be asked to host the first ISME conference in North America in 5 years. And as I was talking with Dr. Wicks just a moment ago, there's some debate. It may be the first ISME conference in North America in 10 years. In any case, it's a great honor, not only to host, but also to contribute to the shape of the conference, both the overall theme, intellectual traditions in dialogue and conflict, as well as the tantalizing keynotes and the calls for papers. We were particularly pleased to see multiple panels cohere around the thought of MacIntyre and Elizabeth Anscombe, since Collegium owns the GEM Anscombe archive, which are housed here in special collections at Penn. Some of you have already made frequent, even abundant use of these papers and are here to see them again, but others might wish to see them for the first time. And you're welcome to make an appointment in special collections to do so if you wish. For more information on the Anscombe papers, please see page 17 of this program booklet. And you may also wish to get involved with our ongoing online Anscombe Unboxed series, which you can find a QR code for in the back of your booklet, page 19. Before I pass the baton over to Dr. Wicks, please let me also thank our generous co-sponsors. The University of Notre Dame's DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture, the Eleanor H. McCullen Center for Law, Religion, and Public Policy at Villanova University, the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Philosophy, and the University of Pennsylvania's Program for Research on Religion and Urban Civil Society, of which I am also the executive director. Now, two quick notes about the two optional activities on the program. These are not the only two, but these are the two that I'll reference. So this evening at 5:30 p.m., Collegium has invited one of our conference presenters, Father Scalaro, who has graciously agreed to celebrate a votive mass for Alasdair MacIntyre. It will take place at the Penn Newman Center on 38th and Sansom. All are welcome to attend, whether Catholic or not. And if you'd like to go and can't find the group going, please feel free to ask a Collegium staff member. By that point, too, we'll also, so there'll be some staff members in white robes, too. We have a couple Dominican friar interns, so it should be easy to find if you need to be pointed in the right direction. Second note, the banquet tomorrow. If you have a sticker on your name tag like this, congratulations, you're registered for tomorrow's banquet. If you do not have a sticker, congratulations to you too. You must have some other exciting plans tomorrow evening that do not involve the banquet. So now finally, it's my pleasure to pass things off to the Executive Secretary of ISME, Dr. Peter Wicks, whom I'm honored to call a friend. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Dr. Peter Wicks.
Welcome, everyone. It's a real delight to see you here. ISME conferences are always a gathering of old friends and friends-to-be, and it's lovely to see people who have been involved with the society for many years and people who are here for the first time. I've just got a few words of welcome, and maybe I'll start by explaining Dan's allusion to the question of when were we last in America? It's not so much a debate as just a sort of technicality that ISME was heavily involved in the organization of a conference in 2019 at Notre Dame, at which MacIntyre himself was the keynote speaker, but it wasn't technically an ISME conference. It was a collaboration between the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture, or just the Center for Ethics and Culture as it then was, and KSEP, an organization with which we're very friendly and share a number of members. But the last ordinary conference was in St. Louis in 2015, I believe, marking a full decade. We had tried to establish a pattern where we were alternating between meeting on one side of the Atlantic and the other, but we weren't wholly successful in that, and then there was a global pandemic, which you may have read about in the papers. So we are trying to get to a place where we restore a kind of normalcy, where we move back and forth. And I was delighted that Collegium were willing to collaborate with us and host this conference. I describe it as a collaboration. At ISME, we believe strongly in the principle of subsidiarity, and people who are closest to decisions are usually the best placed to make those decisions. It also implies that the people who are the local hosts do the vast majority of the work. So I am tremendously grateful for the team at Collegium for all the hard work that went into getting us to where we are today. A few more remarks, especially if you are new to the society. We have a reputation which I think is well earned of being a friendly society, a welcoming place. I certainly hope you'll find that to be your experience. However, if that happens, it happens because of you. So I would encourage you to sort of approach this in the spirit of openness and friendship. If you are a regular, this is an opportunity to catch up with old friends, but I do hope you'll still take the opportunity to meet new people. And with that said, I'll mention one piece of housekeeping, which is an event happening this evening at the New Deck Tavern. It's in the program, I think that's the right title. Is called a Early Career Scholars Workshop. If looking at the program, you look to me like an early career scholar, somebody who's either in graduate school or has been in graduate school recently, you've already received an email about this. But I wanted to say something to all of you about what we try to do. This is meant to be a place where people who are relatively early in their careers can meet people who might be helpful to them, who might have useful things to say, including useful things to say about who else they should be talking to. If you think that would be useful, you are welcome to come, however long ago you were in graduate school. It's a very informal event, a chance to just meet different people, so you'd be very welcome. Similarly, if you would like to be someone who's offering words of advice and experience, you're welcome to come too. So some of you have already received a formal invitation, but if you didn't, don't take that to mean it's not something you'd be welcome to attend. The theme of this conference is very appropriate. In the sort of founding law of the society, a remark that Alasdair made about the importance of the all too infrequent dialogues occurring between Thomists and Marxists has been a sort of guiding insight. But more generally, we're struck by how MacIntyre's work, for all its trenchant critique of the modern academy, is marked by a tremendous openness to learn from a variety of sources. So we do want this to be a place where there are dialogues that don't normally take place across different intellectual traditions, but also across disciplines. We are explicitly, it's in the name, an international society. We have members now in, I believe, 43 different countries on every inhabited continent in the world. But not as explicitly, but equally importantly, we're a very interdisciplinary society. People who have an interest in MacIntyre's work and his project from a variety of different intellectual disciplines, and who can often be of service to each other at sort of helping people to understand how MacIntyre has engaged with different disciplinary conversations. So I do hope there'll be an opportunity for that as well. And then finally, at least for the moment, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this is a special conference for another reason too, which is it's the first time the Society's meeting since Alasdair MacIntyre passed away. I don't plan to say anything more about that right now. There will be a number of contexts in which it comes up. But you're joining us at a time when there are important conversations to be had about the implications this has for the Society's work and how we view our mission going forward. The program is tremendously exciting. There are lots of papers I'm looking forward to, but the conversations that happen outside of the formal program are an equally important part of why we gather together in the same place. So I will welcome conversations with all of you about the vision for ISME's future. And without further ado, I'm delighted to turn things over.
Well, I'm Nicholas Ogle, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you, especially after sending so many emails back and forth with some of you over the past few weeks and months. And I just want to thank Peter and the rest of the Central Committee of ISME for entrusting me with the responsibility of serving as conference secretary. I'm relatively new to ISME, but my familiarity and deep interest in the thought of Alasdair MacIntyre goes back all the way to my undergraduate days when I first read After Virtue. And it was really reading MacIntyre that set me on my own scholarly path to study in the moral theology area at Notre Dame, where I had the opportunity to attend some of MacIntyre's famed fall conference lectures that I'm sure many of you have either been to in person or watched on YouTube. They've had quite an influence, and I think our second keynote address will be based on one of them. And just as I'm sure is the case with all of you, it's hard for me to conceive of my own academic path apart from the influence of MacIntyre. So I'm especially grateful to be with all of you in this time immediately after the conclusion of his life and career. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, May Sim. Dr. Sim is professor of philosophy at the College of the Holy Cross, where she also serves as director of the Asian Studies program. She received her Ph.D. from Vanderbilt, where her dissertation, Aristotle's Understanding of Form and Universals, was directed by Alasdair MacIntyre. She is the author of Remastering Morals with Aristotle and Confucius, and has published over 30 academic journal articles and book chapters, exploring various topics in comparative philosophy and virtue ethics, with a particular focus on Aristotelian, Confucian, and Taoist traditions. She is the contributing editor of the Crossroads of Norm and Nature, essays on Aristotle's Ethics and Metaphysics, as well as From Puzzles to Principles, essays on Aristotle's Dialectic. And she's currently working on 2 book-length projects. The first, a Confucian account of human rights, and the other, a comparative study of Eastern and Western perspectives on metaphysics and ethics. Dr. Sim has previously served as president and director of a number of philosophical societies, including the Southwestern Philosophical Society, the Boston Area Colloquium in Ancient Philosophy, the Metaphysical Society of America, and the Northern New England Philosophical Association. She is also a fellow of the Center for Contemporary Aristotelian Studies in Ethics and Politics. Her presentation this morning is entitled Becoming Aristotelians and Confucians with MacIntyre. Please join me in welcoming May Sim.
Let me start then by saying that I'm deeply honored for this opportunity to deliver this address to the Society of MacIntyrean Friends and Followers. I'm heavily indebted to Alasdair, without whom I wouldn't be who I am today. Having enrolled in a program to study philosophy so that I can learn how to read difficult texts on my own, I never had any aspirations to be able to work in this field. My aspiration was to become a school teacher, maybe in a primary or secondary grades in Singapore, and then to spend my leisure reading philosophy. So when MacIntyre told me before the final year of my fellowship at Vanderbilt that he would be leaving for Notre Dame, I didn't know the plans he had for me. He suggested that I put a prospectus together for my dissertation so that I could defend it prior to his departure. Since he was leaving, I had asked Professor Henry Tilo to direct my dissertation. When Alasdair found out, he came to me and announced that he would be the one directing my dissertation instead. He then asked if I was a member of the APA, to which my response was, "What's that?" "You'll be a member of the APA," he proclaimed. And that was how it all began. All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to Quinn, I'll be free to wander as I speak. So the title of my talk is Becoming Aristotelians and Confucians with MacIntyre. And so the aim of this comparison is to compare Aristotle, the early Confucians, such as Confucius and Mencius, and MacIntyre on the topic of becoming virtuous. And why? First of all, it's because they agree about the common goal for being virtuous, and that is human flourishing. And they agree too that in order to flourish, one needs the virtues of character which enable one to reason practically and also have practical wisdom. Now, three additional similarities are that each of their accounts presuppose a human nature view, and also the cultivation of practices or cultivation of virtues in order to have the moral virtues. And they agree to that there are certain prerequisites such as the social, political, and economic conditions. Now, aside from the similarities, there are obviously some differences. To explore just one, we could ask about the accessibility of practical reasoning. How inclusive is this? Assuming ideal conditions for each of these thinkers, we could ask who engages in practical reasoning for the common good or the whole community or the state. So here are the thinkers lined up. To begin with the Confucians, they can only conceive of a kingship or a monarchy as a legitimate form of government. And as such, for them, it is the sage king who is able to engage in such reasoning for the good of the state. And when it comes to Aristotle, his ideal is a polis within which the citizens take turns to rule and to be ruled, and so they are the ones who engage in such deliberations. And finally, when it comes to MacIntyre, we know that he is skeptical of the modern nation state, and as such, he thinks that it's the local community members, members who engage in occupations and practices such as farming and fishing, who are able to engage in such practical reason. Nevertheless, we can ask the additional question of who might then be able to exercise the moral virtues, virtues such as justice, generosity, courage, and truthfulness. And for the Confucians, he would say that it's everyone who can engage in the exercise of these moral virtues, because for them, a state is simply a family writ large. So that anything that happens in the family is already contributing to the state. And for Aristotle and for MacIntyre, their answers would be similar to before. The citizens for Aristotle and all the local community members for MacIntyre who are not totally dependent or disabled. So another way of construing their similarities and differences is to compare a couple of them. So we would say that the Confucians and MacIntyre, for instance, would assert that flourishing is something that can happen when one is not engaged in a political role. Whereas Aristotle would insist on one's being a citizen who's engaged in politics in order to flourish. So for the Confucians and MacIntyre, this would include the farmers and the laborers, whereas Aristotle would exclude these people because they lack the leisure as well as the resources for virtue. And Aristotle would insist on there being the prerequisite of wealth sufficient for one to be generous. Whereas for MacIntyre and the Confucians, wealth is not really required because generosity consists in aiding the needy. So the aim of this comparison is that given the kinships between these thinkers and their common goal of human flourishing, as well as the virtues of character and the social, economic, and political requirements for cultivating these virtues of character, I'm hoping that the comparisons would reveal their strengths and weaknesses, enabling people to be moral and also enabling human flourishing. Now, here's an outline of how this paper is going to go. There are 4 parts, and according to MacIntyre, any good thesis should consist of 4 parts. Only 4, no more, no less. And so the first part would be an account and comparison of their human nature. Then the second part, their accounts of culture cultivating virtues, the third part, comparing their prerequisites for the cultivation of virtues, and finally, the fourth part, evaluating their strengths and weaknesses. So, first part, human nature. So human nature for all of them comprises of certain faculties and capacities for feelings or emotions, as well as desires and thoughts or reasoning. So comparing Mencius and Aristotle to begin, Mencius thinks that human nature is made up of 4 feelings. So these feelings are the feeling of compassion for those who are suffering, shame and disdain, shame toward one's own moral failings, disdain toward those of others, reverence toward one's parents, and finally the feeling of liking, approval of what is right, and disliking or disapproval for what is wrong. And for Aristotle, as you all know, his account is that of the human soul that comprises the rational and the non-rational parts. The non-rational parts including one's desires, such as the bodily appetites for sex, food, and drink, as well as the emotions, shame, anger, fear, pride, and so forth. And for Mencius, each feeling is already bound up with and inclined toward its respective virtue. And that's not the case for Aristotle. When it comes to the desires, they aren't already inclined toward any virtues. So to look at each of the feelings for Mencius, there's the feeling of compassion toward the suffering, and when such a feeling is cultivated and perfected, one will have the virtue of what he calls dren, virtue of benevolence or humaneness, and what this includes is one's extension of the love for one's parents and family members, extended in a graduated manner toward others in the community and ultimately to the world. And the second feeling of shame and disdain toward wrongful acts for him is perfected in a virtue of righteousness or justice. And the third feeling of deference toward one's parents and elders in the family, when perfected, becomes the virtue of ritual propriety. Now, ritual propriety for the Confucians consists of a set of prescriptions for how one should behave in various roles and relationships. So, for instance, children to obey and respect and honor their parents, and rulers are supposed to do what is best for the people and love the people like a father. And finally, the last feeling for Mencius is the feeling of approval of what is right and disapproval of what is wrong, and it is perfected in the virtue of wisdom. So here, as you can see for Mencius, everything is on the same plane. So human nature consists of all of these feelings: compassion, shame or disdain, reverence for elders, and the feeling of approval and disapproval, all on the same level. And when perfected, human nature consists in the 4 virtues of benevolence, righteousness or justice, ritual, propriety, and wisdom. So everything is on the same level, and all of these virtues are required. Okay, so for Aristotle, as you can see, this is his soul division, and if you click on it, it is divided into the rational and the non-rational part. It's animated, so as you can see, it's the rational part consists of the speculative and deliberative part, and we'll just be concerned with the deliberative part today. And the non-rational part consists of the desires, feelings as well as appetites, and the rational part is perfected in the intellectual virtues, which consists of Sophia and Phronesis, and when it comes to the desiring parts, they're perfected in moral virtues, which constitute the ends or the goals of our actions. Next. All right, so comparing Aristotle and Mencius, we, for example, will see that feelings for Mencius of, say, shame and disdain already would incline someone to avoid immoral acts. And contempt for such acts in others would end up naturally encouraging righteous or just behavior. For Aristotle, when it comes to an untrained person, one could experience either too much or too little shame. So, for instance, following Christopher Raymond, he states, quote, "A bashful person shows his character by feeling idols, by being pained at the thought of disrepute in an excessive way," end quote. Whereas a shameless person, for Aristotle, doesn't feel shame at all. So shame then doesn't naturally encourage righteousness or justice for Aristotle. So here's a transition to MacIntyre's human nature and a recap of Aristotle's and Mencius's accounts of human nature. We'll see that Mencius emphasizes our feelings, which aren't separated from reason. So, for instance, feelings include our wisdom, which is our reasoning about what's right. But for Aristotle, there's the sharp distinction between the rational and the non-rational parts. And they share the goal of becoming virtuous. So I'm just going to focus on MacIntyre's both dependent, rational animal here. Unlike Aristotle, for MacIntyre, desires aren't radically distinct or distinguished into the non-rational and rational parts. So for Aristotle, desires in themselves can't issue reason, but can listen to reason. Whereas MacIntyre would claim that intelligent, non-rational animals such as dolphins, chimps, and dogs have desires, and these desires are already our reasons for action. So following or explaining Aquinas' understanding of Aristotle, MacIntyre claims that some non-human animals are moved by precepts, and they can learn from experience and distinguish between friendliness and hostility. So they have the conceptual capabilities of distinguishing between sameness and difference. So they possess natural judgments, exhibit a semblance of reason, and share in natural prudence. So MacIntyre states, quote, "The wolf and the sheep have reasons for acting as they do, although they do not have the power of reason." So MacIntyre then likens intelligent animals' actions to human beings having understanding, in that they are, quote, "already guided by a kind of practical reasoning," end quote, by having reasons for actions. And human beings then are born with the prelinguistic conditions necessary for development of human rationality. And this, for MacIntyre, would explain the transition from someone having the potential to reason to having to actually being able to reason. So, because there's already some good for the child who aims at, say, a prelinguistic reason for action in desires, MacIntyre thinks that the child can consider an alternative good that's a better reason for an action in reflection. So MacIntyre's account of human rationality then differs from Aristotle in that his claim is that desires are, to a certain degree, already rational. So comparing MacIntyre and Mencius, Mencius's claims that human desires, feelings are already inclined toward their respective goods. And MacIntyre's claim is that there's already some good that the child aims at in his desires. So their views of desires and reason then are closer to each other than they are to Aristotle. Now, moreover, if you consider MacIntyre on the issue of natural law, he maintains that we need rules and virtues in order to flourish. And rules and virtues are actually precepts of natural law that are directed at the common good, such as do good and avoid evil, preservation of life, education of the young, living in an ordered society, and seeking knowledge. These precepts are promulgated by God, and they are noble through reason. So MacIntyre's view is actually closer to Mencius's. If you consider Mencius's view of human nature as good, that is already endowed by heaven. Now, heaven doesn't have the same theological connotation for Mencius as it does in the Western views, but rather it just has this cosmic sense of being the creator and source of everything, the seasons, if you will, and the requirements in the natural world. So being endowed with the four sprouts of virtue by heaven means that a human being can have knowledge of his nature and virtues through reflection. Moreover, if you consider that Mencius's view of human nature is good, already inclines to good, here, this is his proof. He wants to say, quote, that all humans have hearts that are not unfeeling toward others. And he gives it for an example, a proof of this, that anyone would experience alarm and compassion when one witnesses a child who is about to fall into a well. And this he takes to be evidence for one's human nature being benevolent. And this is something that one can know by reflection. Now, so considering human nature for all three then, whether human nature is good or neutral, it requires cultivation to flourish. So for Aristotle, this consists in the goal of achieving theoria and phronesis. For the Confucians, it's, especially for Mencius, it's a perfection in the four virtues. And finally, for MacIntyre, it is the goal of becoming an independent, rational, or practical reasoner, that is, becoming virtuous. On to part two, cultivating virtues. So for MacIntyre, virtues are learned in context of practices. And so one acquires skills and learns goods internal to each practice, so that one is able to distinguish the means and the ends of actions. So when is one performing an action for the sake of, say, pleasing one's mother, practicing the violin, for instance, as opposed to playing and practicing the violin for its own sake. So one also learns how to respond to various situations that are beyond the, resources of rules. So here, in order to respond to these various situations, MacIntyre claims that we must already have the virtues of temperance, courage, justice, and also the intellectual virtues, ultimately to become an independent, practical reasoner. So, in addition, this is what MacIntyre states, the acquisition of the necessary virtues, skills, and self-knowledge is something that we in key part owe to those particular others on whom we depend, end quote. And this dependence continues into adulthood because one could commit errors, be they errors about particulars or generals, or one could be plagued by moral errors such as prejudices, fantasies, and insufficient sympathy toward the suffering. So we need friends and families and colleagues for such corrections, and also to lead us to evaluate our reasons for actions. So once one becomes an independent, practical reasoner, one will continue to participate in the relations of giving back to the community by deliberating the common good for the community in order to sustain its practices from which one first acquired virtues needed for the practices. So here are the differences then between Mencius and Aristotle before talking more explicitly about their views on cultivation. So here for Mencius, human nature already inclines toward the virtues, but nevertheless it still needs to be cultivated in order to have all of the virtues. And for Aristotle, obviously human nature is not already good, but he also thinks that one needs cultivation or habituation in order to have the virtues. And for Mencius, reason and emotions or feelings are already united, whereas for Aristotle, they're separated, but to be united. And Aristotle's aim for cultivation is to perfect the psyche of the human soul, which we've seen in the chart, is to be organized hierarchically, with the intellectual or rational part taking priority over the non-rational part, whereas for Mencius, the ultimate goal is to achieve the heart-mind, or the Shin, that is perfected by all of the four virtues of benevolence, righteousness, reverence, or ritual propriety, and wisdom. So, like MacIntyre's account of practice, cultivation or habituation for Aristotle involves the performance of virtuous actions and how it's the performance of these actions that make one virtuous, whereas for the Confucians, for Mencius, it is to engage in the ritual proprieties. Remember that these prescribe the various ways of right behavior toward various roles and relationships, so one is to avoid anything that violates these rituals or limits. And for Aristotle, we all know that the virtue consists of a mean between two extremes. So, for instance, the Megalosukos, or the magnanimous person, that his behavior is between that of the extremes of vanity or pusillanimity. And Mencius too and Confucius have such a mean. So Mencius, for instance, talks about actions that are neither too constrained or arrogant nor lacking in dignity. And Aristotle relies on the model who has achieved such virtues, someone who is spoudios or the phronimos, and the Confucians rely on the sages, people who have the way, yoda, or the exemplary persons, the jinzi. So, comparing the Confucians and Aristotle, we know that the Confucians rely on the rituals, whereas even though Aristotle has the customs, which are kind of like the rituals, they're not quite as elaborate nor emphasized in Aristotle. And the Confucians are content with being unacknowledged in their virtuous actions, whereas Aristotle would insist on the Megalosukos taking proper pride in his actions. And the Megalosukos engages in large-scale benefits to the city, whereas the Confucians talk about being filial at home, and just doing that is doing the work of government or politics. Now, MacIntyre would acknowledge that there are a variety of cultures with various rules that justify parental authority and attitudes, some of which prevent children from developing into independent, practical reasons. These parents then, according to MacIntyre, would be regarded as unjust, and they are engaging in self and other deception. In contrast, you have families that express the giving and receiving relationships required for human flourishing. So, in short, he'd agree with the Confucians about practicing good rituals for the cultivation of virtues. So MacIntyre also talks about the significance of the virtue of giving and receiving being required virtues for him. So he would disagree with the Confucians especially regarding their exemplary persons going unacknowledged, being content with that as a giver or a moral agent. And he would disagree too with Aristotle about the Megalosupras, who takes pride in giving but would forget what he has received. And this is problematic for MacIntyre because it just exhibits this illusion of self-sufficiency that the Megalosupras engages in. MacIntyre would also reject both the family and the state as context for the common goods. And this is because the family lacks self-sufficiency, whereas the state for him is too large to include everyone and their interests. Moreover, he thinks that in a modern nation state, it's the wealthy and powerful minority who get to determine the goods for the community. And in contrast, MacIntyre prefers local communities as the context for achieving and deliberating the common goods. So it's important to note that when it comes to the individual and communal good, for MacIntyre, neither is subordinated to the other. Because in order to pursue and define the individual good, one must first recognize and make one's own community goods one's own good. So Aristotle and the Confucians would agree with this. Now, what's distinct is that MacIntyre distinguishes between common goods of the local community and the common goods of the whole community. So the common goods are goods that belong to families, other groups, and various practices. Whereby his claim is as follows, quote, each individual, as an independent practical reasoner, has to answer the question of what place it is best that each of those goods should have in his or her life. And here it's questionable if Aristotle and the Confucians would support such individual choices. So, third part, prerequisites for cultivations. So here Aristotle would insist on certain external goods that contribute to one's blessedness in order to cultivate the virtues. So examples of these are being well-born, having a good family, beauty, which means that one doesn't look utterly repulsive. And also certain instrumental goods, such as having friends, wealth, and political power. He states we cannot easily do fine actions if we lack the resources. In many actions, we use friends, wealth, and political power just as we use instruments, end quote. So for Aristotle, though, there's no guarantee that one is born or isn't born as a slave or into a laboring class, which then would prohibit a virtuous life of exercising virtues of courage, generosity, and justice, etc. Now, Mencius, in contrast, would insist that there be a benevolent government who would provide the conditions for cultivating the virtues, stating that a constant heart can only be achieved by a constant livelihood. I quote, if the people lack a constant livelihood, it follows that they will lack a constant heart, end quote. Again, he states, an enlightened ruler must regulate the people's livelihood to ensure that it is sufficient to serve their fathers and mothers, to nurture their wives and children. In good years, they're always full. In years of famine, they escape death. Only then do they rush toward the good and follow the ruler easily. End quote. He also insists that the government be providing the people with enough leisure so that they can cultivate the rules of ritual and righteousness, and in short, all of the virtues. Now, when it comes to Mencius and Aristotle, they agree about the necessity of there being certain external or economic goods for the cultivation of virtues, but they would disagree about the role of the government in providing such goods to everyone. And Aristotle also would acknowledge the significance of the family for cultivating the virtues. But the polis doesn't rectify bad luck if one weren't born into a good family. All it does is that it provides the laws about the virtues to be cultivated for those who are fortunate with good families. For Mencius, the family is the root of the state. And the state also ensures the functioning of the family, enabling the evaluation or the cultivation of virtues, which then are extended to the state, from the family to the state, and also beyond, extended to the world. So this is what Mencius says about extending virtue to the world. Quote, if everyone would treat their parents as parents and their elders as elders, the world would be at peace. Quote, people have a common saying, the world, the state, the family. The root of the world lies in the state, the root of the state lies in the family, the root of the family lies in oneself. And so the good person at home is the source of the good in the world. So again, he states, treat your elders as elders and extend it to the elders of others. Treat your young ones as young ones and extend it to the young ones of others. And you can turn the world in the palm of your hand. That's how easy it is to have an effect on the world. So extending one's love, respect, and kindness from one's own family to strangers is the perfection of benevolence or humaneness. So the same virtues in the family work for one's relationships and actions outside of the family. So MacIntyre would agree with Aristotle and the Confucians about the importance of the family for cultivating the virtues. Nevertheless, he would disagree with the Confucians that it is the root of the state because the family lacks self-sufficiency. Instead, MacIntyre would say that the common good of the family actually relies on the common goods of the local community, places such as schools, workplaces, debate clubs, religious congregations, and sports. So given MacIntyre's skepticism about the modern nation state's ability to provide the common goods for the community, he thinks that it's because it's too big to be able to have this sort of deliberation by the independent practical reasoners. So his view then differs from Aristotle and the Confucians in that Aristotle and Confucians would say that not everyone has the capacity for deliberating the common good, because some people labor with their mind as opposed to others who labor with their bodies. So their different rules would lead to different virtues. So, for instance, Aristotle would say that the state is composed of unlike persons that's analogous to an animal being made of soul, body, reason, and appetite. The household, moreover, consists of a husband and wife, and master and slave, and there are different classes of people in the state, meaning that all citizens don't have the same goodness. So rulers' virtues are different from those of the students, of the citizens. Mencius too would agree that a division of labor is required in order to avoid exhaustion. So, as he puts it, some labor with their hearts and some with their strength. Those who labor with their hearts are the rulers, and those who labor with their strength are the governed. And they are distinct in being fed, and those who feed. And I quote, "This is the righteousness common to the world," end quote. So, like MacIntyre, Aristotle and the Confucians are also concerned with corrupt governments. And they agree that the pursuit of wealth and power amongst rulers and government officials are the sources of corruption. So they distinguish between the legitimate rule and deviation. So, for instance, Aristotle thinks that government by one few or the mass of citizens with an eye to the common interest is what makes a legitimate government. And likewise, Mencius believes that a king who uses virtue to exercise benevolence can make people genuinely submit because they're pleased in their hearts, because the ruler is doing what is good for them. In contrast, for Aristotle, those rulers who pursue their private interests are deviations from legitimate rule. And likewise, for Mencius, a hegemon, quote, uses power to feign benevolence. Power is inadequate to make the people's heart submit their hearts. So here then, regarding the common good, Aristotle and the Confucians agree that it's the legitimate rulers who pursue the common good. And this job or role is distinct from that of the citizens of various jobs and respective goods, what MacIntyre would call the local communities. So how does MacIntyre then move from the local to the common good? Well, he relies on the virtues of the independent, practical reasoner who possesses the virtues of giving and receiving because they acknowledge their dependence on others. So the common good would include people who are both disabled and dependent, because he thinks that all of us are on a scale of disablement. And that all of us are at various stages of our lives dependent on others. So he thinks that it is in everyone's interest then to include the disabled and dependent in our considerations and deliberations of the common good. He also relies on what he calls just generosity as a virtue, which is an uncalculated sort of giving to those in dire needs, regardless of whom those people are, as well as our lack of relationships to them. He draws on Thomas's concept of misericordia, as well as the Lakota concept of watan, hagonaka. So this uncalculated giving includes justice, because generosity is owed to those whom we give, and it's uncalculated because one is generous in a proportionate way to the needs and not to the relationships, so that such giving would include total strangers. It's beneficence because it exhibits the charity and love and friendship toward human beings, and moreover, it is done out of pity and understanding that another's distress is also one's own. So here are MacIntyre's prerequisites for reducing the competing interests in different groups when it comes to deliberating about the common good. He would recommend that we reduce the inequalities in income and wealth, and to prioritize the social and moral considerations over those of economics. And concrete suggestions from him would include self-imposed labor mobility in order to preserve the stability of the community and the traditions of practices. And that we should also invest in the education of those who are economically unproductive. We should take turns for tedious and dangerous jobs, and ultimately be anti-capitalistic and consumeristic in our actions and pursuits. So finally, on to their strengths and weaknesses. Essentially, in response, you can look at MacIntyre's suggestions as a response to Aristotle that shows the limits of Aristotle's polis, which excludes those who are lacking in blessedness from the pursuit of human flourishing, those who are not well-born, that includes the slaves, women, and laborers, and those who happen to look repulsive. But considering a response by the Confucians to MacIntyre, the Confucians might ask him about the following, given that the same virtues, Confucian virtues, including humaneness or benevolence, is extended from the family to the rest of the world in a graduated manner. And such virtues are accessible to everyone, given that this is built into their human nature, which is good. So it automatically includes the disabled and dependent because benevolence or humaneness issues from our feeling of compassion, so that the four virtues are interrelated, so that one is necessarily acting benevolently, justly, ritually, appropriately, that is exhibiting the right regard toward others, and wisely, satisfying what MacIntyre calls just generosity. Now, an exception to MacIntyre's just generosity might be that humaneness or benevolence would prioritize the family. But the Confucians are immune from nepotism because their actions must necessarily be moral. So ultimately, it's morality that would trump one's any nepotistic actions. Then the ultimate strength of the Confucians lies in the view that human nature is good. And despite one's corruptibility when deprived of right social, political, and economic conditions for cultivating oneself. Mencius has this view of the sage, who never forgets. He's different from ordinary people in that he never forgets his innate goodness. And hence, even in a corrupt environment, he is the one on whom we can rely to enact the moral actions. Now, as for MacIntyre's weakness, given that he allows for corruption in local communities, which local communities we depend upon for our learning of the virtues and also perfecting them, a question to him is, how would one change from a corrupt local community to one that is virtuous? Moreover, he allows for conflicts between different groups of practitioners in a local community. So one could ask, how would his concrete suggestions resolve any of these disagreements? One could ask about disagreements about life and death decisions that involve large sums of resources from the community. And thank you.
And luckily, we have some time for questions. So please raise your hand. I'll call on you, and my colleague Esther will run you a microphone. So first, this gentleman over here. We'll start over here.
Thank you very much, Professor Sim, for such a rich, complex, and encompassing lecture. I'd like to ask you, however, regarding the locus for flourishing, which in Aristotelian terms would be eudaimonia. I think it's fairly clear that for Confucius, the locus for flourishing would be the family. That's why even the kingdom or the empire has to be governed with the emperor king as the father of a family writ large. Whereas for Aristotle, clearly it's the political community, the polis, right? And we understand the limitations of each. My question, however, is whether there are resources in MacIntyre to face the challenge of flourishing within the Catholic tradition as all-encompassing. Okay, so he speaks of independent practical reasoners, obviously within that only happen within local communities, and then he speaks of independent rational animals, which is probably a wider understanding. But then he comes in contact with the Catholic tradition through Aquinas, and there has to be room for everyone in that sort of flourishing. So I'd like to ask what your views are on this matter. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. If you think about my criticism of MacIntyre and proposing that the Confucians have a stronger account because of their reliance on this innate human nature, this innate goodness, I was just thinking that, things would have worked the same for MacIntyre had he emphasized his Thomistic influences and how it is that there is this similar, natural law that, inclines us toward the norms of goodness, what's good already. So here, when it comes to the local communities and encountering the Catholic community, I think that the resources are there. They know what the good is and what human flourishing looks like. So when MacIntyre relies on this deliberation amongst everyone, in the community about the common good, which then includes the Catholics as one of those groups, there'll be conflicts, and it's not clear that the virtues and the recommendations that he suggests are adequate to resolve any of those conflicts. So I don't know. I'm here to learn from you if you have better suggestions about how it might work better. So I'm actually more on the side of those who, like Aristotle and Confucius and the Confucians, who don't really rely as much on the majority and everyone to engage in these deliberations because they just don't have the knowledge or the resources, unless they have certain expertise. And MacIntyre is rejecting that resource of expertise, what the Confucians have in the sages, what Aristotle would have had in the citizens, because ultimately it is the citizens who know what is good for everyone, regardless of their particular interests. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Again, thank you for your remarks, Dr. Sim. My question is concerning the cultivation of virtue. Of these 34 thinkers, which one do you think has the most well-developed notion of a well-formed conscience within the Catholic, as understood by the Catholic tradition? Particularly what I'm interested in is within the Aristotelian tradition, it seems like the well-formed conscience would provide that sort of regulation of the amount of shame one would feel, and thus would, to a certain extent, bridge the gap between Aristotle and Mencius, specifically about the feeling of shame.
No, I'm missing your question. But can you say it?
Yes, just about the which of the thinkers do you think has the most developed notion of the well-formed conscience, the well-formed conscience within the Catholic tradition that through cultivation one would have a conscience that would help regulate one's behavior in certain circumstances.
Good. Thank you. Well, the way that I have compared them is in terms of how inclusive they are. And here, obviously, if we just left Aristotle back in the 4th century, before the Common Era, he's going to be quite exclusive, so that, too many people would be excluded from such cultivation. And MacIntyre is trying to make up for that by including everyone. And his whole focus on how we are dependent on others, so that we have to continue acknowledging our dependencies. I think that works very well for an imperfect society, one whereby we acknowledge our fallibility and how it is that we need to continue learning. Now, what the Confucians do is to emphasize the rituals, how it is that the rituals would become so ingrained in us that we would, feel shame if we were to fail to carry out these rituals, so that it's a very effective instrument in terms of human emotions. And given that they talk, they think that the family is sufficient for that. So it seems that they have the right emphasis on how important it is to just be cultivating such values from the get-go. And MacIntyre recognizes that too, even though he denies that the family itself can do the job. So MacIntyre's account would be good for people who are already adults, inclusive in that sense, and the Confucians would have the advantage of, focusing on how it's, it has to start in the family, it can begin in the family, so family values are important. And if you think about it, it's, you can't isolate the family from the society. So no matter what happens in a family, no matter how hard you try to inculcate certain values in your children at home, once they interact with others in the society, it's a losing battle. So who has the strongest account? Well, I think that, overall, MacIntyre is pretty good compared to Aristotle, and likewise with the Confucians. And, but both are defective in that they rely on certain perfections. So the perfection of the community, as well as the perfection of the family, and we live in a very imperfect world. So I see the attraction of, making sure that everyone is an independent, practical reasoner. But I doubt that that alone can move us toward the common good, because there are just too many conflicts between different people and different groups and interests, and it's not clear that having the virtues that they have would enable them to come to an agreement about the common good, which in turn for MacIntyre is so important for the cultivation of virtues.
Further questions? Let's, the gentleman right here in the picture.
Thank you. I guess I was wondering, when looking at how Aristotle saw kind of how you would achieve kind of blessedness, you mentioned how kind of like a lot of it's, there's a good bit of luck, and that the state kind of has this, is not looking to fix the luck. And I kind of see it's looked at, I guess, looking at like the narratives that are like behind it, like Greek myths, like there's some people born from the gods, and those are the lucky ones, and those are the heroes, and those are the people, like, you're not looking to make everyone born from the gods, but you do want to, take care of the ones who are. And I was wondering if with kind of the Confucian, you were saying with like Mencius and the kind of a wider, interest in kind of making things good for everyone. Is there something in kind of the background narrative and mythologies that push things in that direction? I guess that's what I was wondering, that kind of narrative background.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, he does emphasize emphasize legendary sage kings, right? So you have narratives about that. So one in particular is about Emperor Shun. And Emperor Shun was legendary in his virtue simply because, despite the fact that his father, his stepmother, and stepbrother repeatedly attempted to kill him, right? So, for instance, they'll, have him dig a well, and then when they thought that he's still in the well, they'll just cover it up, or they'll have him climb up into a granary, and then think that he's still up there, and then they'll take away the ladder and set fire on the granary. All right. So, despite those repeated attempts of the family to kill him, he maintained his reverence and piety toward his parents, stepmother included, and his stepbrother, so much so that he even accorded his stepbrother a province to officiate over when he's the emperor. So it's stories like that that make one, that inspires one into thinking that, oh my goodness, here's this guy who remained virtuous despite the fact that he's dealing with such barbaric figures. Stories like that would be helpful in solidifying how inspirational, someone who is virtuous can be.
Other questions?
This question actually will make more sense because of his question. Early in your presentation, you talked about these four, I'm going to call them sentiments, one of which was disdain for people who are morally failing. And then the very next one was reverence. It wasn't just respect, it was reverence, which I take as a very strong word.
Yes.
And your story here makes perfect sense. Wouldn't he have been supposed to be disdainful of his relatives because of their immoral actions? And how do you get to disdainful reverence? I'm having trouble getting those two words in my head. I can do one or the other, but I can't do both. So, and I know MacIntyre gets high every time he's around a moral dilemma. So this, I think, actually fits the theme of MacIntyre.
Right. So, here, if you attempt a Stoic distinction, how it is that, yes, you could end up being disdainful of any moral action because it is wrong, right? But nevertheless, you are not going to be able to change, right, somebody's unjust actions. So what you can do instead is to maintain your virtue. And so when Emperor Shun, right, despite the fact that he knows and would disdain these horrifying actions, he's never going to attempt to change the behavior of his parents or his stepbrother. So what he can do instead is to perfect his own virtues by doing the right thing with respect to his parents and his brother. And here the virtues would call for his, right, taking the high road and doing the right thing as a brother in the position of an emperor. So doing what's right by them instead of focusing on their wrong behaviors, which he would disdain, but it's not something that he would attempt to change.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question.
Thanks so much for the talk. I'd like to invite you, if you're comfortable, to say some more personal things. Here's the big philosophical question that I've got. Aren't there, in MacIntyre, also virtues that are acquired through the family and through these other local associations that make possible participation in this larger public life, which is not a family, which is not even a community, it's a group of strangers. And so 3 quick stories here. I'm looking at Rostiana, she's making me think of the 2019 meeting where MacIntyre spoke at Notre Dame, and he was so gracious with his time to young people there. But 10 years before that, on his 80th birthday, I remember there was one person that asked MacIntyre a question on Aristotle and challenged his interpretation, and he was speechless. I never saw him speechless, and that was you. Right? But then a third story, in 1987, you mentioned the American Philosophical Association meeting. It was the first time I went to that meeting, and when I was sent there, I was told, I didn't know what it was either, and I was told, it's a market, right? It's a market of strangers. It's a meat market, right? And you have to be ready to fight. And then they told me to go to this smoker in the evening, and everyone was talking about this session that I wasn't at, that MacIntyre was, and it was very combative apparently, and he was known for the zigger. And so some people said he'd won, and some people said he'd lost, but it was this sort of combative element. And so, one, there's this question of, what was he like in those times? Was he this combative person, or was he a family member, like a fatherly figure, preparing you to go out to this market of strangers? And also, I just wanted to reflect on these changes that I saw in his life from that period to later, when he wasn't combative, he was generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Well, back in those days, 40 years ago, if you think about it, when it comes to my relationship with him, yeah, he has never been combative with me, but I have seen him being combative with others, and it always perplexed me how so many people are afraid of him. They would agonize about conversations that they intend to have with him. But I've never experienced that, and I don't know. I don't know why, but we've definitely gone through, some difficult conversations, and he's always been kind and given me the right advice. So there was a time when I doubted that I could be doing this, because one of my professors at that time confronted me with my work and said, "Where is Sim?" And that you can imagine that as a graduate student, you're expected to have your own views. So I went to MacIntyre and said that I'm not sure if I should continue, because here's this guy asking me about sin, and he's right, there isn't a sin. And his response then to me was, "Well, do you think that there's a difference between Descartes' view and Aristotle's?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're fine." And he went on to tell me that if I were to quit at that time, it would be as if the history of philosophy didn't have a Kant. So that was quite an amazing response, because the class that I was taking, where the professor, in which the professor had asked, where sin was a class on Kant. All right. Well, thank you so much.